Always choose orange.
Well, Tara, welcome to Always Choose Orange. I really appreciate you coming on here to talk about your creative process and your current exhibition and all the art that you've made throughout the years.
Oh, thanks for having me. I don't even know how you came across my work, but
Yeah, I actually came across your work. There's a blog that I check out every now and again, and I actually don't even know how I discovered this blog. I just found it in my favorites one day, and I must have accidentally stumbled across it. But it was called Art and Theology, and it kind of it like is this sort of interface between poetry, visual art, all that stuff, and then sort of like work that has theological significance. So I came across your work from a post, but it was pretty recently, I think like a month or two ago. There was a post on there, and it was a few pieces from uh, Ask Now the Beast, and it was the two cross ones that you did. So Umbra, the black one, and then the white one. And I don't know how to pronounce the name of that piece, but it's beautiful and I love it.
yeah, it's Di Lucesco.
De Luchesco. Okay. So, anyways, it had those two pieces on there, and I was just like, wow, this is awesome. And then I went and checked out your website and sort of went through all your collection. So, anyways, that's how I stumbled across your work.
Oh, cool.
But so I want to start just sort of talking a bit about your artistic background and sort of evolution as an artist a bit, and then move into like an in-depth look at your creative process and probably asking more in-depth questions than a lot of people would, because the focus of this show is sort of just really diving into the creative process and getting nitty-gritty and into all the details and stuff. And then in the midst of all that, would love to hear more about the current exhibition and stuff too. So the first question is, where did art start for you? So where did you first find yourself consistently making things, and what were those early endeavors like?
That question's always kind of weird for me to answer because I don't remember like that. There was never like this romantic, specific time where the light shined down on me and I decided to be an artist. Um, but I don't know. I grew up in an environment that was really strict, born again Christian, my whole life in a way that was very constricted and suffocating and isolating. And I think there was always this little escapism part of my brain that kept my hands busy. So when I was younger, it was in the form of just like playing with toys, but then it started to be as I got older, like maybe drawing. Um, but then I was always drawn to art. There was something mysterious about it, like a secret language, or it was kind of like saying something that I felt that I didn't even know that I felt at the time because I was so out of, disconnected from that, from how I was raised and the environment I was in. Um, and then when I was in high school, I really started to pursue it more. And then it became like there was no other, it was kind of like there was nothing else for me to do. I always knew that when I hit that point, like when you need to decide, quote unquote, what to do with your life, that was like the only option. There wasn't like a other thing.
Was it sort of like your only option in the sense of like, this is really the only thing of all these subjects that I like to do? Or was it more so just thinking about like a job that you would want? Or what kind of was that decision like?
It was never even a job. It was kind of just like, it kind of was the only thing I liked to do, but it was kind of like there was no, it was just a straightforward, okay, like that's what I'm doing. Like when you say my favorite color is blue, it's kind of like, you don't say like, well, I kind of might do red or I kind of like gray. It's just kind of like very um straightforward in that way.
Yeah, I had the same experience. So I went to school for creative writing, and I
Mm.
remember having no idea in high school what I wanted to do at all. Didn't think about the future, didn't think about jobs, didn't think about anything. And it was just kind of understood like I'm gonna go to college. And I remember sitting at orientation and they were asking about declaring your major, and I was like, oh, books. I love reading, I love writing. Creative lit, but like, or creative,
Mhm.
yeah, all that stuff. And so, anyways, I can really relate to that. That makes a ton of sense. So then when
Yeah.
you went to, so you did that and made that decision and went to art school, right? Like for college. What when you were doing that, what did you end up going there for, and what type of classes did you take, and then sort of how did that shape what you're doing now, if it did?
So when I was in high school, I did a lot of pre-college classes where you can go in on the weekends and take college level like figure drawing and stuff, and the credits actually go to the school. The um, and I was obsessed with all of it. I was started to become obsessed with art and just learning about it. But I went to the Art Institute of Boston at Lesley University, which is now Lesley College of Art and Design. And I went for fine art. And 2 weeks into the program, I went to the photography director and showed him the photographs I had taken, just like, dinking around. And because I hated sitting in a room full of people drawing boxes. That's like what first year drawing, and it drove me nuts. And it's like I did a lot of that stuff in high school. I had a good teacher that was like actually taught you like pretty much we were doing like college level, that kind of thing. And so I switched into photography because it was something I didn't know much about. And there's a lot of technical aspects to photography. And even just, you need the darkroom, you need to rent the gear. There's like all kinds of things. So there was a lot more for me to learn, I felt. Where with fine art, like drawing and painting, I kind of, not that I already knew how to do it sort of thing, but it's something that I did that I could practice on my own sort of thing. So I switched into photo and yeah.
And then as you switched into photo, so I read some, some articles about your work and listened to a few of sort of the other conversations that you've had with people. And I remember hearing you say something about someone asked you if you had sort of an aha moment about your voice. And the way that you had kind of answered it was that, I mean, sort of, but that was like the first time you did sort of one of those still life-esque photos. Can
Mhm.
you talk a little bit about first of all, like why you even chose to do that? Like, wasn't it an assignment? Was it something you did for fun? And then what what that sort of felt like to be like, oh, okay, yeah, this is the thing.
Yeah, that was actually an aha moment for me. Um, so, I was always kind of playing with photography to try to like figure out what I was going to try to say. And I did a lot of things with people and like narrative scenes. Everything was always set up though. And it wasn't necessarily still life. There'd be people and blah, blah, blah. And but the objects in the pictures always had a significance and a symbolism and added to the narrative. Um, and then one day I was started to shoot with a large format camera just because if I was setting things up, it always seemed silly to be using the silly little camera. Um, and I like to print big because I was always still inspired by painting. Um, and so I kind of thought, would it be boring if I just set up a still life and I shot it and I was like, oh, this is what I'm going to do. So, um, and then that first picture was actually on the cover of Art New England, like
Awesome.
12, 15 years ago.
Do you remember like, well, I'm sure you do. What was it of? What did you choose to put in the still life and what were you kind of exploring in that one?
It was a diptych, and the first one was a bowl of bloody ice, and the other one was a still life with like raw meat and things. So
Okay.
life
Okay.
and death and transience and flesh and melting ice and impermanence.
Yeah. So, okay. So I browsed through sort of your collections to look at sort of how your work has evolved through the years and things like that, which is a really cool experience. And I encourage anybody listening and watching to do that as well if they're interested in what anything that you're saying. But what there seems to be like a major, progression through that. So I'm curious as to how you think about sort of collections in the scope of your larger work, do you see them sort of being a continuous whole? Is it something that it's just kind of happening, like I'm drawn to this, I'm gonna do that until I'm not interested anymore? Like, how do you think about sort of that whole large scale version, like vision of your work?
I think of my work as kind of theater, with each series being like an act in the play or a book, and each series is a chapter. So it's telling this like big grand story. So the whole scope of my work is a narrative that I'm working on till I stop.
Yeah. Um, do you think about that sort of in advance as you're deciding what collections to be from? So, because I think of like looking at some of your earliest stuff, like the work that you were just mentioning with like a lot of the raw meat or like animal corpses or, a lot of the wine and stuff. And it's very like, I kind of described it to myself, and maybe you've heard other people say this too, but like your early work was very close to like the death, and it's sort of now moving farther away from the moment of death into sort of this like deterioration, and the insects are coming in and there's more like skeletal things. Now there's still plants and some organic matter weaved into that. Um, was that something that sort of just kind of happened as you got interested in other things? And then once you realized it, you're like, oh, okay, there's a bigger story here? Or did you sort of intentionally want to explore that whole thing?
It's kind of as I go along. So
Yeah.
back then, I didn't know I'd be making work like I'm making now. Um, and my work is so personal that I think that's what I needed to get. And it always has felt like something I needed to get out of me. Like an explode, like I felt like I was going to explode my whole life. So that's partly why I became an artist. I think I needed to like get it out. But I think the raw meat and stuff was just where I was at. And then it got to a point where I felt done with that. And I took a long break from my work. I mean, long for me was maybe like 8 months.
Yeah.
And um, then it started to become like I wanted to feel post-apocalyptic and more earthy, where the flesh should wither away to the bone, the wine is dried up and it's replaced with bones, and um, the earth takes over, so the wine is replaced with dirt. And then the insects take over. And then as time went on, um, everything just keeps becoming more animated. So
Hmm.
everything, it was still very like in the way I was working in the past, like tabletop, very simple and tight at first. And now it just keeps growing and expanding. And I think about it, and this is kind of a recent thing for me. I've always been obsessed with Dante's Divine Comedy. But in the past, I was really focusing just on the inferno, the hell aspect. And I feel like now I'm kind of in purgatory, and I'm not there yet, but I want my future work to almost be like paradise. And I
Yeah.
don't even know what that, I have like glimpses in the back of my head what that is going to look like, but I still don't even know. So
Yeah.
that's how I
Yeah.
think about it.
I love that. Yeah. And like, I love the idea of like, and it sounds like this is happening, but definitely correct me if your experience is different. I love that it sort of sounds like you're informing the work's informing you, and you're sort of growing up together, exploring this sort of thematic theme. And then once you're ready to move into that spot, it's just gonna happen. That's cool.
Yeah.
Um, to dive into your creative process specifically, how do your ideas for pieces typically come to you? Are you going out and searching for inspiration? Are you looking at paintings? Are you reading things? Are you listening to music? Or do you wait for things to just sort of pop into your mind as you're living your day-to-day life? Like, how do you make sure your creative well is filled, I guess?
I mean, it's all of what you said. It's like I've listened to a lot of music. I mean, I have been bartending my entire adult life, so pretty much like 18 years. But the past 15 or so, I've worked in music venues,
Oh,
and
okay.
it's sometimes like five at once. So five different venues at once. So like I've seen so many bands live that it's crazy. But I've always, I listen to a ton of music. I love movies. Um, read a ton of books. I love books. I love art books. I want my financial state to get better. It's a little hairy at the moment from producing this show, but I love like splurging on big, huge art books. But a lot of art history, painting, and some contemporary stuff too. I was
Okay,
just looking at an Anselm Kiefer book. You know
cool.
him,
I
the
actually
German.
haven't heard. I might have seen his work, but I don't know him by name.
You would probably know it if you saw it, but German artist. He has a great Wim Wenders, that director, did a great movie about him that's worth watching. It's
Okay.
beautiful. Um, but yeah, my creative well is always full, but you can get inspired by anything, you know. Um, and just life in general, like me and my past and dealing with my past and um, things going on in your head. But sometimes ideas, how I usually go about it is I have a notebook and I write down words that just pop into my mind or little concepts. And then after a while, um, they just slowly start to form into images
Mm,
in a sense. But sometimes ideas have just popped into my head and I'm like, oh, okay, cool. You know? And then that's when I start the drawing process. So I have an idea, and to establish a concept visually, I sketch it out.
okay.
So the drawing comes first.
Yeah. And then when you're sketching something out, are you looking at reference images? Are you doing it from your mind? Is it kind of a mix of both? What's sort of that process like?
Mostly from my mind, unless it's like a complicated skeletal thing where I actually need. If the drawing reference would only be like for technical purposes, like a skeletal creature that I needed to look at to get correct, you know.
Yes.
Um, but mostly from my head, especially since I've been doing it for so long now that even a lot of skeletal structures, I like can just do it because I've done it
Mm.
before. So it's like almost muscle memory sort of thing.
Yeah, and you're more familiar with the anatomy of certain creatures and stuff.
Hmm.
Okay.
And everything's not like super, my drawings are so chaotic and free. They're not super realistic looking. So I don't, and they're mostly for me.
Yeah,
So I'm not doing it to do something totally correct. It's just to be more expressive. So
that makes sense. I noticed on your website, there's like a category for sketches and one for drawings. Is the difference to you that a drawing is meant to be a final product? Or like what's the difference, I guess, between those two things?
sketches for me are preliminary sketches that are going to be a photograph.
Got
Um, drawings exist on their own.
Okay.
And they're actually, most of them are quite large, like the one behind me, if you
Wow.
can see it.
Yeah.
They're like 8 feet tall. So,
Oh, dang.
yeah.
That's
The
cool. Okay.
sketches are like, the biggest they go is like 23 inches high. So, like 15 by 23 or something. But usually they're like 13 by 17. They're not big. So,
Okay. What are you sketching on? Do you have like a notebook or what? How do you do it? Like what kind of paper? What are you using? Like a pencil or?
it's watercolor,
Okay.
but I do it in pencil and then I watercolor it and then ink it and then I use gouache for the highlights, for
Okay.
like the gleam things and stuff like that.
How do you keep track of them all? Are you usually working on one piece at a time or do you have multiple things going?
I usually, I mean, in terms of sketching, I have one sketch at a time because they don't take long, take
Yeah.
a day or two. Um, I know the podcast people can't see
Mm.
this, but this is like my little drawing
Yeah.
idea area. So everything on the wall is something that I either very recently finished or haven't done yet. So that's like my little idea incubator corner where I hang all my ideas and write and things like that. So
Because you have such clear-cut like pieces of your process, do you have designated spaces for different things that you do? Do you find that you naturally gravitate to, oh, this, like you just said, like this is the idea spot. Um, Do you find that that environment, like where you're at in your studio, like helps you get into a zone?
Um, well, part of that is we haven't touched on like how I photograph, but I use natural light. So I have three windows in here and I have two sets up so I can work on two pieces at once. And partly, I won't like simultaneously work on two, but sometimes when I'm in the zone, I'll shoot one and then I'll have the negative. And then before I can drop off the negative to get processed, sometimes he likes to have two instead of just doing one. Um, so I can then shoot the other one and get them both done. And if I'm waiting for the film to get processed on one, I can work on something else. And so the windows are for that. And then, so the corners, that's where I work on that.
That makes sense. Okay, cool. I definitely want to come back to the photographing piece, but once you, so you have the idea down, right? And you have these words and they've evolved into images and then you've sketched it out. What then, so then when you have the sketch and it comes time to, okay, I would assume in most of your work, at least the things, the parts that I'm familiar with, then it's like, okay, I have all these things, right? These insects or these skeletons or whatever it is that you then need to assemble. What happens next? How do you know how many, like what you need to order? Like what is that whole process like? Like how do you even secure some of this stuff? I would imagine it's probably just on the internet, but like are you rolling a van up behind the zoo and being like, look the insects
Yeah.
in here?
I've been doing it for so long that I'm just aware of where to get everything, especially, and I think it's kind of just a cycle of maybe I'll be buying insects for something else, and it is all from the internet.
Yeah.
But I've been doing it for so long, and I have I know where to get things now, and I actually have people that I'm friends with on Facebook all over the world that I can get this particular like black moth from him, and I'll just write to him, and he'll ship them to me, and you know, um, and just various stores from all over the world online. Um, And since I already know that those things exist and I can get them, I kind of make work now knowing I can get them. But then sometimes when I'm searching, I'll see something cool, like some crazy moth that I haven't seen, like a blue one. I'm like, oh, I want to do a series with this. And um, the same with the bones. I kind of know where to get things. And um, I have an articulator in Vietnam that I work with a lot. And he does a lot of great, crazy fish skeletons. So I want to start moving into more underwater themed things. So
What is an articulator? Is that someone who reassembles skeletons or what is that?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So the process of how that goes is kind of like you have an animal, and then you have to like have it usually with the beetles, the dermicid beetles, and they eat all the flesh off. But then you have to do a whole process of like really cleaning the bones and then gluing them together. So
Do
they
you
do that.
Okay, that's cool. That's fascinating. Do you find yourself interested in like the critters and creatures and stuff that you photograph and use in your pieces, or is that something that more so is there for symbolic purposes?
More for symbolic purposes. They're
Cool.
like characters and then like I'm kind of interested in maybe like uh yeah, like what they mean in culture and just even sometimes their gestural personalities, like the shape of their bodies, or like fish have all these crazy faces that are really bizarre. So
Yeah.
um a mix of those two things.
Okay. When you're approaching symbolism in a piece, because like your work is so rich in symbolism, how do you how do you think about that sort of thing? That's something that I've always been curious about, just in art in general, right? Because it's like sitting through an art history class and you look at like these pieces from hundreds of years ago, and people will point out, oh, this symbolizes this, the skull symbolizes this, and how much of that in your work is intentional in the sense of I'm putting this in here. To me, it means this, and I want people to feel this. And then how much of it is more of an aesthetic thing of just this feels right to have beetles here or the wine here? Like, what I guess how much of it is intellectual and how much of it is instinctual?
It's a good mix of both. I think with my upbringing, I had a very Bible heavy upbringing where my whole life it was going to church twice on Sunday, Christian school, Bible before dinner every night, all like growing up. And a
Mhm.
lot of it when I was a really little kid, like going into adult church, not child church, and hearing stories of hell. And when you're like that young and just hearing all this stuff, um, especially at that age, like, you're a sponge at that age. It's kind of like it sits with you. So there's a lot of animals in the Bible.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it comes from that, but also in art history, and a lot of it's instinctual. So I think a lot of it's just like, I always feel like as an artist, like it's not all about me, me, me. It's like I'm just a vessel. And this is like, I'm just kind of continuing a tradition of images that need to come out now,
Yeah.
in a sense.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Do you do and how did you learn some of the symbolism stuff? So like if you get like fascinated with a topic, do you just kind of look up different things or how do you develop your knowledge of that?
I've always loved art history, and I actually double majored in that.
Okay.
So I think just reading for so long and reading a lot, and I even have a book of symbols, and I'll do my own research, even if I already kind of have like a vague knowledge of symbolism. If something's starting to show up in my work, I'll go research that deeper.
And then earlier too, you were mentioning like being a big fan of giant, art books and stuff like that, and then sort of the other inspirational pieces. And since we kind of were just touching on that with like the symbolism and places you like to go for research and inspiration, what are a few like, do you find that there's materials that you return to that have sort of lasted throughout your artistic sort of career and stuff? Like, are there things that have really inspired you that you return to?
Do you mean in terms of things in my work or things that inspire me,
Oh,
like outside?
could be both. I mean, I'm interested in both. So in this particular question, I was more interested in like the inspirations, but I am also curious in what you return to. Yeah.
A few things. So always Bosch's Garden of Earthly Delights. That's a big one for me. And anything kind of in that vein. Musically, I've always been inspired by two artists. I've always had a thing for Nine Inch Nails ever since I was 12 years old because my music was so restricted. Like I couldn't listen to anything unless it was like Bible music. And
Yeah.
just to come across that somehow, I don't even remember the exact how I did. I was like, what is this? And it like just channeled every like pent up suppressed feeling that I ever or like stuck in feeling. So that's always something that I return to. If I ever feel stuck once in a while, I like just listen to that. And then I love the music of Mark Lanigan, who is in the Screaming Trees and things like that. But I love his solo stuff. It's very like hallucinatory and kind of like druggy sounding, which I like. But a lot of symbolism in that kind of aligns with how I think because I think he had a religious background. So, and those are
Okay.
just two musicians, but I have a lot that. So those are
Yeah.
two that there's a ton, but off the top of my head, for the sake of answering your question, those popped up.
Sure, sure. Yeah, yeah. And then, so thinking from the process standpoint, so then you get all of whatever you're going to put in your piece, and you've ordered whatever it is, whether it's insects or skeletons or things like that. Actually, I guess I have a question before I get into this next question. Is everything that you use like real, like organic matter, or sometimes do you have to use like replicas of things?
No, I'm very strict about not using replicas. It's like something about it, it needs to be real.
Yeah.
Everything needs to be real.
And it looks like that, which is why I was curious. But sometimes
Yeah.
you wonder, you're like, how do you even, yeah. So that's cool. So then once you have that all, how do you how do you like physically assemble all of this, right? So maybe it's most helpful in communicating it to like talk about a specific piece. So like maybe something from Ask Now the Beast or something, but like how do you actually execute this? Because you're photographing it, and I'm assuming it's probably, is it flat laid on a table? Are you hanging stuff from wires? Like what, how do you do it?
So that's an interesting thing because whenever I've been in the gallery where my show is, Ask Now the Beast, um, people will ask me how I do it. They don't understand. And they ask me if I lay it flat. And it's no, it's like very much I build all these armatures and they're very sculptural and upright. And I use a lot of wire and hot glue. Um, so they're standing out. And
Okay.
it's like that scene in the photograph actually is pretty close to real in how it looked. And I photograph with an 8 by 10 camera and have the negative scanned to a high resolution scan. And then I Photoshop just like the wires and stuff and the structures out. But I try to do as minimal amount of Photoshop as possible. And I just to take out the stuff and get all the tones to look how it looked in real life.
Yeah. Okay. For people who don't know, what is an 8 by 10 camera? So large format, right? But like what does that completely mean?
So a lot of people say like, "Oh, you photographed one of those old-fashioned cameras."
Yeah,
And it's actually mine's not that old. It's from 2006. But it's a wooden box camera with just, the accordion bellows and the lens. So it's pretty bare bones. It's just like a box with a lens on it and ground glass on the back where I can see the piece um, through the glass. And the camera I use, the 8 by 10, means that the negative itself is 8 by 10 inches.
okay.
So it's huge. Um,
Yeah.
so I can blow images up to be gigantic and they still have hyper real detail.
Okay. That's fantastic. I am not like I don't know a ton about cameras, so it's really cool to see like how people do that because I always wondered how you could blow something up that big without losing resolution and stuff. And so then when you first got into photography, were you shooting like other things or like how did you even come into contact with one of those?
Well, I mean, I started with like a 35 when I
Yeah.
was in high school because that's, I don't know when 8 by 10 was.
No.
Or did I have the resources or even like with a little like silly point and shoot camera. And I used to photograph like all kinds of like just, when you first come across a camera, just like stuff on the street and whatever. And I photographed bands a little bit. Um, and then it wasn't until I went to school where those cameras were available to me because I had no photography people in my family or in my circle. Um, And then I started people were shooting with the square, which I was never really into that. So um, just that dimension. But then there was like a 6 by 9 camera, like medium format I started to play with. But they were always so heavy and finicky and like awkward for me because they were like bigger, but not that big. And then I actually took a class, large format photography that we had and learned how to use it. And that was just like felt right for me, because I always feel like I was kind of painting with the camera. I don't consider myself like a photographer. I
Right.
use photography. I'm an artist, but I don't, yeah, I'm creating paintings with a camera in a
Yeah.
sense
That
and
that makes
sculpture.
that makes total sense. Is so then was like photography as like a craft sort of. Is it more so your interest in it like I just need to know enough about this craft in order to make these painting like, pieces? Is that kind of it? Or do you ever study photography and stuff too? Like are you inspired by that or
Um, the thing is, I don't look at much photography at all,
yeah.
which is crazy. Uh, but I enjoy it when I come across it because I have a lot of friends, or like just even in my community, and just from being in that are mainly photo heavy. And I always enjoy like going through their libraries and looking at the book. And if I go to a photo show, I appreciate it. And I know I had to take photo history and a bunch of classes. And I think it's interesting, but it's not my daily go-to, you know?
When you are photographing your like the like sculptures, like the things that you've made, how like I'm assuming that film for those is probably not as cheap as like 35 millimeter and all that stuff. Are you usually taking one shot? Do you ever have to go back and try it again from like a different angle?
No, one shot,
Okay.
one
So
shot. And the guy who processes my film, I've been working with for a while. And so he'll like just tell me he knows what I'm looking for, and he'll just text me like, came out good. He used to send me a picture of the negative. Now he doesn't do that. He's like, it looks fine.
yeah.
And I trust him. So it's like, it's perfect. It works out. And then I can like either leave the setup if I don't need to like make a new piece right away, or I like to leave things up for a little bit in case I have curators come so they can see it. But yeah.
How does that whole piece work? So like I guess the day to day of everything, right? So like and this is going to be a lot of questions rolled into one, and I can slow down and pick them apart if necessary. But I'm very curious about like how long these pieces are taking you, how many you're doing sort of on a, I don't know if what the right time period would be, a month, yearly basis, and then sort of like that whole, what goes into everything that you do, like how, how are you spending your days and how long does everything take?
It's different and it comes in cycles. So a piece can take, it depends on how complicated it is and how like many small little parts there are to it. So like Umbra, for instance, took a little longer, and Di Lucesco did because there was a lot of little pieces, like a bunch of little insects, and they're more delicate. So that would took me a few weeks, and then I photograph it, and then the editing of it takes like a week or two. So they take a while, but then I've busted things out that looked really complicated, like that underwater scene abyssus.
Yeah.
Took me only a week to put that together, but they were kind of like a lot of big, heavy pieces that just kind of like I put into place. And um, but it comes in waves in terms of making work, and I'm having a show and doing all of that work of prepping and a lot of paperwork and image lists and arranging sizes with the framer and a lot of writing. And right now, I've spent the past few months promoting the show, and that's how I was on that art and theology
Okay.
blog, because I forget how, with my work, something that is cool is there's so many elements to it. It's art, but um, there's also elements of science. There's elements of theology and religion and spirituality and mysticism. So I did a ton of outreach to entomology departments. Like Harvard is a big resource around here, Harvard University. And they have a natural history museum and a museum of comparative zoology. And so I emailed pretty much like everyone in that department and shared my work with like that angle.
Yeah.
And then I have this book about, I read a lot of like stuff about art in the apocalypse and like how the apocalypse has been depicted in art over the ages. And I reached out to a woman that wrote a book that I have. And then I went on a deep dive of looking at art and theology departments in the UK, because a lot of them are in the UK.
Huh.
And I came across that blog and wrote to her. So I was on that blog because I wrote to her.
That's awesome.
So that's how I've been spending a lot of my days now.
That's
With
cool. That's
doing stuff like
fascinating.
that.
Thanks. No, thanks for sharing like a glimpse of that. Because I always wonder, and I don't think the average person who's not an artist themselves knows everything that goes into, right? To us, it looks like cool, right? You have an exhibition and they hung some stuff on the wall, and it's
Yay!
like right, like months, even longer of prep work and stuff. So that's cool to see everything that goes into it. Like for people who like are curious about like what the exhibition is and live maybe in the sort of northeast of the United States and are able to access that in person. How have you been like describing the exhibition? Like, do you mind sort of giving a little overview on like what people could expect and like what all is there?
Yeah, the show is from my series Ask Now the Beast, and it's kind of like this focusing on like the harvest or the idea of the harvest, but like the title actually comes from the book of Job in the Bible, and it's 14 monumental photographs. So the biggest one framed is like 95 by 65. Then there's 10 preliminary sketches and a reliquary of objects in a case of elements that I use to make the work.
And then how does so when it's like assembled and stuff, how much is the museum and like the folks who work there, how much are they organizing things, or do you have a huge say in like this is where everything needs to go? Like what is that partnership like?
It's different in every situation, but um, we kind of, it was several meetings and discussions, and you can only plan so much in advance. So we had like the curators and whatnot. There was a lot of collaborative talking and meetings and Zoom meetings before to go over each piece so that they could write about it correctly and well. And then a lot of like, I'd get the writing and then kind of articulate things that might not have shown up necessarily aligned with what my intention was. Or but we even had meetings in advance at the in the space of where things were going to go, but then the work got delivered and I wasn't even there, but the curators kind of laid it out with how they thought it should go, um, which was very different from what we initially planned. And then I showed up and looked at the layout, and it was awesome.
Cool. That's
So,
cool. That's good.
um, so it's kind of like you can. It's collaborative, and we each do different things, but a lot of the framing, all of the framing, and all of that sort of thing, I dealt with. Um,
What is it like with your work, right? So I've only encountered your work digitally, and obviously, like I hope someday to see it in person if I'm ever out in that d direction. But what is it? Do you find it challenging to make something that like is so medium specific, right? This large format photography that I would imagine is the way that you envision in your mind, and that's sort of the representation of it, and then having to, in order for people to access it, post it on social media or on your website and stuff. And it's obviously like I still am moved by it and love seeing it in that form. Is that like a challenge for you in making the things like the sort of displaying of it?
you mean to have so many people experience it digitally and
Yeah,
not in
yeah. Do
person?
you feel like they're missing out on the full experience, I guess, in a way?
Yeah.
Or
That's why I like to include, like, if I send a piece to someone, I include detailed shots of it. Because if you look at Umbra, for instance, it looks like maybe like visually stimulating, but you don't get a sense that like every little insect has a personality in my mind and that like there's so much going on. So I'll send details. Um, I think you lose a sense of like the texture and the color and how light is hitting it too in the smaller piece, but when you look at it up close, you see that like everything's super intentional,
mm,
and how detailed they are. It's
yeah.
more like the sacrifice of the detail gets lost that bothers me,
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense, right? Because that's something that I kind of got the more I sat with it. Like your work is definitely not something that you want to see for like 2 seconds as you're like scrolling through stuff. You want to kind of have it right there and then look at all the details. Like, um, do you actually, this is something I forgot to ask earlier, but the detail question made me remember when you're assembling it, do you assemble it in the exact spot that you're going to photograph it to make sure the lighting is all right, or do you assemble it and move? Okay.
yeah, I do it by the window because a lot of how I angle things and where I put things depends on how the light's hitting it.
Okay.
So it is very photographic in that sense. It's kind of like I'm using light in a very intentional way.
So with, you've been doing this for a long time now, like making art and sort of like letting your pieces evolve and stuff. I was curious if there's maybe one thing that you've learned in the last handful of years that's made a big difference for you in your art. It could be, um, a technique lesson. It could be sort of a way of thinking about art or just anything that's made a difference for you in your ability to make things in the last couple of years.
There's a couple of things. A lot of it's a big thing for me. Then this wasn't in the past couple of years. I think my first trip to Europe, I went to Madrid and lived in all the museums and just to see, and I saw Bosch's Garden of Earthly Delights in person.
Oh,
Um, and just seeing all that stuff and just being there and how art seems to be this like grand, um, omnipresent, sacred thing there
yeah.
kind of kind of like resonated with me in a big way. Um, and then I've been to Belgium and I saw a lot of other paintings that I love happen to live there too. A lot of Last Judgment and Apocalypse paintings live there, which is kind of cool. And then a lot of it too is kind of just spending more time in nature and hiking a lot and being more interested in things like that. But a lot of, and this is personal, but the past year or two, um, really diving into like my childhood stuff in a big way and how that sits with me and dealing with that has been huge and beneficial to kind of really like face the nitty gritties and come to terms with it and figure it out. And that's definitely starting to show up in my work in a really good way where I think it's resonating with people on a deeper level because it's coming from a deep place for me. So,
And do you find yourself doing that more with your art or just kind of in general, like being willing to like think about things and feel uncomfortable stuff or
both. And also, I'm glad I did it when this show opened, or the year before I had this show, or the year I was having this show and preparing for it, because I'm more open about talking about it
right.
and where the things are coming from. Because a lot of it is directly from my background and
Yeah.
things like that. And just feeling like it's okay to talk about it and being able to have words for stuff that I maybe didn't have before.
Yeah. No, that's super powerful. So, a couple more things and then we'll wrap up here. Is there any part of, and this actually might be a somewhat silly question to ask because of how unique your work is, but I do like to ask it to all the different artists that I talk to, which is what parts of your or what part or parts of your process do you think other people who do similar things would find unorthodox? Is there anything that you do that you're like, I don't know why I do it this way. I just like doing it this way. Other people might think that's super weird.
I don't know. Maybe I think I never make anything easy for myself. It seems like I take the tricky way out.
Sure.
I think, um, or maybe the fact that I do in the land of AI and whatever and technology that I shoot 8 by 10. People are like, why don't you do digital? And the fact that I set all of these things up in such a intricate way. Um,
Yeah.
so I think the fact that I still use that camera, people are like impressed, or, why don't you shoot with a digital camera?
Right. So getting kind of back to that inspiration, what are three artists or pieces of art that you'd recommend listeners and viewers check out either because they've resonated deeply with you or because you're like, oh, I wish everybody had seen this, or just plain old you think they look cool.
I think what people are interested in kind of have their own things that speak to them. So, I mean, I have my things, and I've talked about it already, like Bosch's Garden of Earthly Delights.
Yeah.
I love the movies of Peter Greenaway. He's a British director. they're very painterly and theatrical. And off the top of my head, I'm just kind of riffing because
Yeah.
I didn't like think too much about this question in advance, even though you maybe alluded to it. Something that I was really inspired by recently, and this is like so obvious, but I was in San Francisco about a month ago giving a lecture for Photo Alliance, and I stayed with friends that had a great art book collection. And they had this massive, like, you had to have it like in your lap. It was that big and heavy of Da Vinci, and the quality of it was so well done. And there were so many details of the paintings, and just like to dive into a book like that, and it was like, had to be over 1,000 pages. It was like you could kill somebody with this book if you hit them over the head with it. And I just like really dove into just like an old classic like that, but it had a lot of his drawings and stuff, and just the reproductions of it were so well done. And it really like sat with me how like he really was a mastermind, scientific, artistic genius. So
Yeah. That's fascinating. I would love to see that. That's fascinating.
yeah, it's by one of the big publishers, like either Taschen or
Okay.
Faded. Yeah.
Is there
So
in your future, do you ever see yourself making an art book of your work, or do you think it would be too challenging based on like the size it would need to be?
I would love to. I think about that a lot. And I would want it to be that big though.
Yeah.
um, I mean, a lot of it that has held me back, I always kind of felt like I wasn't ready. And I think I'm getting there now, where I have enough work where I could have one. I felt like I didn't have enough work.
Yeah. Right. That
And I
makes
guess
sense.
I could make smaller ones, but I'd want to have like a bigger one. But just even knowing a little bit about how that world works, it's really costly.
Sure.
And it's money that you don't necessarily get back.
Yeah.
It's hard to like, you're not like really making money off of that. And you need to find a good publisher. So the way to go about this, I actually had a friend kind of like talk to me about this. I think the best way to go about it for me would be to go to photo book fairs, because there's a lot of them.
Okay.
And go like bring my work and look at publishers that might seem like a good fit, and then approach them. But I would love to have a book. Because I love books. So, and I think it would be cool to have a lot of big detail shots and things like that, and have my sketches and have some good writing and an interview. So someday it'll happen.
That'd be awesome. Last question here, and then I'll give you space to share anything else that you want to after that. But what are your hopes for when people either come into contact with your work? What do you hope they either think, feel, or experience? Do you have sort of an intent for the things that you work on?
I just want them to be kind of like frozen in their tracks and just like hit deeply. Like I want them to stop and have them think thoughts they either haven't or hadn't in a long time, or feel something they deeply. And I want them to pause and like whenever I come across a work that I love and there's a bench in front of it, I love that, like where you pass something and you need to sit and look at it forever.
Yeah.
Like I want it to be this kind of meditative thing where it makes them do that. And I think it sounds like that's been succeeding for me with my show, because a lot of the museum guides and stuff say that people will spend like an hour in the gallery space. So that's good to hear. It's kind of working.
That's amazing.
So
Okay. Well, to wrap up here, I'll plug the exhibition real quick. So for everybody listening, for everybody watching, if you're anywhere near Massachusetts, Tara's solo museum exhibition, Ask Now the Beasts, is at the Fitchburg Art Museum till I believe January 18th, 2026. Is that the right
Yep.
dates? Yep.
Yeah.
So highly encourage everybody to check that out. Your website, tarasellios.com, Taraselios. Is there anything else that you want to plug, promote, share, talk about as we wrap up?
No, I think the show's still the big thing in the forefront of my mind. But anyone who's listening that has any more questions or whatever, feel free to email me or write to me on Instagram and whatnot, because I'm always happy to have a dialogue with people. So
Cool. Well,
yeah.
Tara, thank you so much for coming on here, for sharing about your process, for all the, incredible work that you've made and stuff. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Always choose orange.